incision made in the groin, and it goes there's the little catheter, a little wire that goes all the way up the femoral artery and through and up into the heart. Because obviously, if we think about it, if we go through the femoral artery, eventually we're going to end up in the inferior vena cava, which then can eventually put us up in the heart where we need to be. So a lot of these things that happen in the heart, we can go that way to kind of replace valves or do different, have different blockages and things relieved just from going through the femoral artery, because obviously the only other way to get to the heart is cutting the chest open. And clearly that means we have to break the sternum, we have to crack the chest, we have to break ribs, we have to do all kinds of stuff that we don't want to do. So anything that can be done by catheter, by feeding a wire through, is preferable. Okay. Myocardial infarction, an MI, otherwise known as a heart attack. So this is an obstruction to the coronary artery. So basically, remember we talked about there's arteries that have to serve the heart itself. Like it really needs to go to the heart to supply blood so the heart can do its job. Now, if it can't, sometimes they're blocked. So we have to go in and do what's called a bypass surgery. So the bypass graft is used to restore blood flow to the area because that artery is blocked. When they say like double bypass, quadruple bypass, it refers to how many vessels that they had to bypass. So they had to go literally, it's kind of like a detour on the road. Like I couldn't go down this street, so I went down another one. What they do in this is they kind of find the blocked artery and bypass it. So if this is the blocked artery right here, you can see that they bypassed it. They got blood here and they went around it. So we bypassed the part that was bad. Okay, now if the artery is not completely like gone, done, no way, this is working, and there's just something called atherosclerosis in there, which is fatty deposits from cholesterol. It forms plaque in the arteries and it reduces the blood flow. So this can also be called arteriosclerosis. So atherosclerosis is the plaque. Arteriosclerosis is when it becomes hardened and then a problem. So what we do is we treat it with something called an angioplasty. So again, we insert that catheter. Remember we talked about the little incision in the groin, and it's inserted, the catheter is inserted all the way up the femoral artery, and then it goes into, so if we look at this first picture right here, we can see, look at how there's plaque. What we do is we put this in, and see how it's got the mesh around it. So look at what we do. We blow up the balloon here, and then the mesh sticks to the outside to kind of act as a doorstop to open up that artery, and then we take the little balloon out, and then this stays in there. So the little stent stays in the artery right there so that it can help get through the artery so the blood can continue to flow. So again, that's another thing that you can watch after you're done with these notes. Watch a video showing a stent and an angioplasty, kind of a cool thing. All right, another problem we can have is hypertension, also known as high blood pressure. So this is basically, we use the sphygmomanometer to diagnose, is it high blood pressure? Remember when we said that the systolic pressure is over 140 and the bottom number is over about 100. Now we're starting to get worried about hypertension. And then another thing that can happen is called an aneurysm. It is when the artery fills up like a balloon. It's a big bulge in the artery. And if that aneurysm bursts, that's when we have a big problem. So it can be anywhere. Some of the more common areas is this one, cerebral aneurysm. So basically we can see right here that the blood vessels going to the brain, there was a little balloon here. That's called an aneurysm. If it bursts, yikes, we can have a whole lot of hemorrhaging going on in the brain. That's what we refer to as a stroke. But it doesn't always have to happen in the brain. It can also happen in the abdomen. This is what we sometimes call AAA, abdominal aortic aneurysm, AAA. So it bulges in here, and then eventually, if too much pressure builds up, it bursts. Now, if this, look at how thick that artery is. If that abdominal aorta bursts, you are pretty much not going to make it, because that is way too much blood. And then lastly, there's two more things called aortic stenosis, which is when anytime we hear the word stenosis, think narrowing. Stenosis means narrowing. So that's for anything in anatomy. Stenosis means narrowing. So aortic stenosis means that the aorta is you can see it right here. You know, it's not as wide as it should be, so that limits blood flow. And then there can also be something called a septal defect. So remember, we have this ventricular septum. It's the thing that divides the right and left ventricles. Well, if there's a defect between here and there's a little hole, guess what can happen? The deoxygenated and oxygenated blood mix with each other, and that is not cool. So a lot of times that ventricular septal defect will have to be repaired because it is too much. All right, so what you can do now is look at some of the videos. You know, just Google some videos of the some of the surgeries that we talked about, maybe a bypass graft, maybe an angioplasty, or any of the other things that we talked about. You can go on the textbook website and look at some blood flow through the heart videos to kind of see how it pumps in and out. So feel free to look at some videos and explore. Thanks for listening.